Okay, welcome to Shift Happens. This is a show where we talk with the people building, breaking, and rebuilding the systems behind the scenes at high growth startups. We love talking about fails and chaos because it is better than any school. I'm your host, Kelly Berdine, and today we're talking with Arik Gaisler. He is the co-founder and CTO of Benji, an innovative new loyalty platform. And we're going to talk about building this venture with a really small team, how they're overcoming challenges of dealing with slower-paced enterprise sales, and any other fun discoveries that come up in conversation. So let's get to it. Arik, how would you describe your day so far?
Pretty good. It's pretty good. Most of my days are spent between coding, talking to customers, doing some product work. So doing it all.
Context switching all over the place, huh?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Great. Well, you have a great background. You've been on both sides. You've been in fast startups and on the enterprise side. So what pulled you into doing this startup with Benji?
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, throughout my career, I worked across most very small startups, kind of like from the beginning all the way to kind of like IPOs. I founded startups before this one as well. I worked at like big enterprises. And really one of the things that I came across throughout my career is kind of like that dissonance between like the smaller kind of like companies and how fast they move and stuff like that. And the bigger enterprises that I've had experience with either working at or working with. And especially with the startup that we started now, it's Benji. Essentially what we're doing is kind of like bringing these enterprises to the same speed as the smaller companies. And kind of like what we
Yeah.
do, we enable them to move quickly. We enable them to do fast integrations, fast partnerships at a fraction of the time with XROI. And that's really what we're doing. And that's kind of like
Yeah.
essentially what we're helping them to build today. And that's what drew me to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've definitely been on both sides of that coin too, both, small and large. And yeah, the larger the company gets, the slower it tends to move. And, while there's definitely benefits of being larger, more money, et cetera, it's you can also get behind if you don't stay nimble and adaptive. So that's really interesting how you're injecting yourself in there. You talk about problem market fit as medicine, not vitamins. Tell me a little bit more about what that means.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of talk around kind of like early stage startups finding kind of like a product market fit and kind of like rushing towards, finding that solution that will kind of like bring value. And the way I see it, especially when you're a small company, when you're just starting out and kind of like you're still kind of like trying to validate, before you actually hone in on your product, you need to really hone in on the problem. You need to make sure
Right.
that, hey, what I'm trying to solve in itself is a valuable enough problem that my potential customers, my stakeholders would find it valuable enough
Yeah.
and to pay for it, obviously, and kind of like see
Yeah.
value in it, regardless of the product. There could be a whole slew of products that can fix a problem, but you need to validate that the problem is important enough. And it's not just like a nice
Yeah.
to have. And it's really a critical path. It's really like medicine that they need and not just vitamins, kind of like something to help them. It's really something that they need, that they, can't live without. I mean, it's part of their critical path. And that's what you should be like fanatical in terms of finding it and finding those small signs with your customer that kind of give you those signals that you're solving something important. And then you hone
Yeah.
in on a problem, and then you hone in on the product itself
Yeah.
that actually solves it.
Make the adjustments and make sure it
Yeah,
lines up. Yeah. Yeah. I think so many people go out of the gate like, I've got this great idea and this great product, but nobody cares.
exactly.
Oh yeah, you're
It takes
definitely
so
doing the
long.
right thing there. So let's just switch over really quick to how you're doing this. You're running, I think you said a 6-person team now, right? That's really small with, some AI agents handling some stuff underneath. But after being involved with much larger ones, what surprised you about going this lean, this small?
Yeah, great question. I had the privilege of building a startup, also starting my startup back in 2018. My first startup called Second Kitchen. And the differences between kind of starting up a startup today versus starting up kind of like a startup in 2018 is huge.
Yeah.
And, by the time back then we started a startup, kind of like after a couple of years, we were already almost 30 people. And today we're
Yeah.
able to kind of like to do for people. I think one of the biggest things, obviously agility, and obviously kind of like you have so many tools today and so many kind of like capability with AI that you can iterate very quickly. It's also a little
Yeah.
bit dangerous. You need to kind of like, you need to be, you need to kind of like know what you're doing. And I definitely think that today you need to be a pretty solid engineer to work with AI because you need to kind of like know what you want, and you kind of like, you need to
Yeah.
know to some extent even better than the AI, kind of like what you want to happen because you're the one that's checking it and deploying it and kind of like
It's
validating
still
that it's
garbage
good.
in, garbage out applies,
It's
right?
still
Like,
garbage in, garbage out. You still need to know what you're doing and all of that. But you can just move so much quicker, and you can try so many things, and so many of the processes that we had in the past, even outside of just engineering and products, and like how do we show demos? How do we create pitch decks? How do we create all of that? There's so many tools today that enable you to do that faster and with more iterations that it's amazing.
yeah, that is,
And it's just an
it's
exciting
a different
time.
world. Yeah, it really
It's,
is.
it's such an exciting time to be building. I just talked about this with a friend like just recently. It's so exciting to be building today, and I'm as excited as I was when I just started out building. Kind of like I had that, suddenly you realize that you have this power in your hands, and kind of like when I went into coding, kind of like you realize that you can build things and kind of like create, and then you kind of like you get used to it and kind of like stagnates a little bit, and kind of like it becomes kind of like just a part of what you do. But today there's so many possibilities. You can use so much by yourself, and kind of like with a relatively small team of kind of like good engineers. There's just an exciting time to be building and kind of like creating and innovating.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's so unprecedented too. Sometimes you just wake up and it's just you feel excited, because it's just new things, and staying curious about it, of course, it helps. Instead of like, oh, it's a drag. I've got to work my way through this and that with, 12 other people to get one small thing done. And you're like, boop, 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 done by lunchtime. And, then you can move on to bigger and better things. Let's do kind of a sharp contrast now with what part of working with these big enterprises has slowed you down more than you expected.
Yeah. Well, honestly, when you deal with and we deal with kind of like large loyalty-based enterprises. So our first customer were actually JetBlue, and that was kind of like our
Yeah.
first launch with them. They're obviously a very, very, very big company. Um, Obviously, a sales cycle. I mean, it's a long sales cycle, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of hoops that you need to go through. And for a small startup, obviously, time is not necessarily a friend. You need to know how
Yeah.
to kind of like to manage your time as you go throughout that sales process to make sure that you're utilizing that time well. That as this deal is kind of like flowing through, you're continuing to push on the product and kind of like continuing to work on other deals, and kind of like you're staggering the deals one on top of each other to be able to kind of to push them along. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, time.
Yeah.
Time is not a friend when you're a startup.
Yeah.
You need to be very, very precise with your time. And you need to make sure that as these deals goes through, you're utilizing your time appropriately.
Yeah. What adjustments have you had to make? Once you went in head first, you're running full speed, and you realize like, oh, we've got to do all this kind of layering and staggering and, filling in the gaps in between. How did you handle that as an organization?
Yeah, so we we built processes around it. I mean, we spend a lot of time because time is so important. You need to gather as many insights as you can from
Yeah.
every conversation. And you
Yeah.
need to make sure that you utilize that feedback and you utilize those insights to continue to push your product and kind of like build that sense of urgency with your customers and kind of like respond to feedback quickly and show them what they want based on what they tell you, which
Yeah.
is we put processes in place for that. We obviously use a lot of AI note takers, and we kind of like we take all that feedback and we push it into our product tool and stuff like that to kind of to gather those insights and work on them. I think that's one part. Another part that we found pretty challenging that we kind of like we got better and better at is finding the right stakeholders. These are big
Yeah.
companies with many, many, many teams.
Yeah.
many teams that, what we're building can interest them because all of them have like partnerships, integrations and stuff like that. And just finding those right people that when you talk to them, they understand the problem and they're like, yeah, this is something that I can definitely use and can definitely kind of like help me hit my KPIs. That's a challenge because you can
Yeah.
spend weeks just talking to the wrong people, like the people that are not
And not
decision
really know it
makers.
yet. Yeah.
Yeah, and that could kill a startup. I mean, time is not a
Yeah.
friend. So
Yeah.
that took us a
When
while to get a hold of.
when this process stretches out like that, what gets harder for your team? Is it keeping momentum, keeping the context, or just managing that anxiety from the waiting and the backing up and changing course?
Yeah, I mean, definitely between deals and stuff like that, there's definitely some anxiety that's involved there. Context, I think context is a good word because not only on our end, because you're dealing with sometimes multiple teams from our customer side and stuff like that, you consistently need to push your context on them. You consistently
Mm-hmm.
need to know that regardless what, even if this is meeting number 10 with these guys, you need to, again, you always need to talk about the value prop. You always need to kind of like to push kind of like why we're doing what we're doing and why we're solving kind of like a very critical need and stuff like that. And every single call, in every single meeting, you need to kind of like to push that context, push that context along as well. Which again, we learned how to do that, I think, pretty well by
Yeah.
now. And it's something that we worked a lot, kind of like on how to do that well. And internally, you consistently need to remind yourselves, when you're working kind of like at a startup and kind of like when you're working with kind of like our internal teams, you always deal with the micro, right? You're dealing with the details. You're dealing with kind of like, okay, how do I push this along? How do I do it? Sometimes you need to kind of like take a step back and look at the macro and look at kind of like why we're doing what we're doing and kind of like why are
Yeah.
why are companies interested in what we're doing and consistently remind ourselves of that and consistently remind our teams of why we're doing what we're doing and what are we solving. Kind of like take that macro perspective, which
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah. Don't lose sight of that big picture.
Yeah.
Keep you inspired too.
Yeah.
What during this process, is there anything that still ends up living in people's heads instead of, someplace centralized or reliable?
I mean, yes, definitely. Obviously, especially when you're like a small startup, you don't have a lot of time for documentation, stuff like that. But specifically because we deal with these fairly large organizations, another thing that we've learned, and this goes back to kind of like the context that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Context is so important. Context comes out of the fastest way to remind people of context and stuff like that is documentation. It's kind of like to refer people to, hey, here's our previous email, or here's kind of like our documentation portal or stuff like that. Actually,
Yeah.
one of the first public things that we built as a company is actually public API documentation because we knew that our customers are going to look at that and kind of going to see that and are going to kind of like want to use it and have questions about it.
Yeah.
And it was, one of the first things that we did. One of the first things that we did is explain to people what we do. Kind of like, this is how we operate. This is what we do. Here's our API documentation. It's public. You can see it, which
Yeah.
is, I think, is pretty rare for like a small startup. You usually don't put a lot of effort into your documentation, into kind of like your context building.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I think that probably builds a lot of trust
Exactly.
quickly.
That's a great word. Trust is, you want to build that relationship with your customers, and you want to show them that, hey, obviously we know what we're doing, but that we're also very transparent about it and kind of like,
Yeah.
we're here to help you and here's how we do it and it's out there and you can kind of like use it and try it out and see for yourself.
Yeah.
And it was very important for us and it paid out well.
Yeah. I mean, and as you learn, as you go along, you can adapt and you can update it and make changes. I wonder if some startups feel like, well, we're not ready yet because we don't have it 100% nailed down. It's like, that doesn't matter. You're not gonna. And that's kind of the whole point. So, go ahead and put out there what you have and, no one's gonna fault you for growing and evolving. So,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. It goes back to kind of like what we talked earlier around, dealing with the problem before dealing with the product. Kind of like dealing
Yeah.
with this is the space that I'm solving, this is how I'm doing it. The details in the beginning are not as important. It's even, you shouldn't fall in love with kind of like what you're building, like the products that you're building. You need to leave space kind of like to iterate on it and to change it and
Yeah.
and to be very flexible about it.
That's very smart. It's wise. What tools actually help you when things are getting a little chaotic? And are there some that you've tried that just added more work?
And it's obviously tools that help us are, all the context that we gather from like our customers via note takers that feed into kind of like our project management, product management tools, even our
Yeah.
coding agents, and kind of like they help us kind of iterate, stuff that we know that matters for our customers. I mean, that's how we
Yeah.
kind of distill that feedback and kind of make sure that we're working on the right thing. And that helps us and we utilize that consistently in all of our processes. I think that's something that helps us. One of the things that personally I don't necessarily think is that value additive is all the AI tooling around. We personally don't use that value around like sales outreach.
Hmm.
We've found that, the human connection is still very important, especially in our field. I definitely think there's fields where, automating kind of like sales outreach and stuff like that is important. Specifically in our field, we feel that our human connection is very, very important, and we haven't
Hmm.
gotten the same results that we wanted. Was kind of like when we automated that, and we kind of like realized that that's because you need that human touch there. Nothing can replace like a human conversation with kind of like your
Yeah.
stakeholders, and that's something that's very important for us, and we still do it. We're very much founder led in terms of sales, and I think that that's something that helps us, and I don't think we'll change that anytime soon.
Yeah. That's interesting. I like that. I mean, it's still, it's a lot of work. Cold sales,
A lot of work.
it's hard.
It's
There's
hard,
no
but it's
way
so
of getting
important in
around
the
that.
beginning. I mean, that's how you learn how valuable your product is.
Yeah.
Even in terms of messaging, even if when you do cold outreach and you don't get any responses, that's valuable insights. I mean,
It's
that tells
data.
me that you're not messaging your product appropriately or your problem appropriately.
Something's not landing right. Exactly. I mean,
It's very important.
that's your lab right there. Let's move ahead to you've got the customer, you've gone through the sales process, and then during onboarding, do your customers start to get a little bit anxious about what they're getting into? Is there some point that gets a little like annoying about it, or that how to get them set up and rolling, and then do you find little roadblocks along the way that they throw down for you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially since our product kind of like introduces them to like a new world where integrations are seamless and kind of like partnerships can launch very quickly, which is very different than the way they do it today. Kind of like in a process
Hmm.
that's, can sometimes take 2 years to kind of like integrate between like two very big
Wow.
companies. We're telling them that, listen, you can do it with us like in a matter of weeks. And that's kind of like our promise to them, and it's exciting for them, but it's also scary, right? Because
Yeah.
when you have a long process, you also know that you have like a lot of room to change, and you have a lot of room to make adjustments along the way, and like it's only going to launch like next year, so there's like a lot of time. And with us, we're telling you, listen, you can launch this integration or this partnership with your partner in a month, in a few weeks.
They're like,
And what
"Wah!"
we found exactly, so what we found is that you need to break it down. You need to kind of like you need to avoid kind of like the situation where, listen, this is kind of like the product, and in a month you launch, and in the meantime, kind of like do whatever you want with it or stuff like that. You want to show them like milestones along the way, and you want to show them
Mhm.
check-ins, and you want to tell them, listen, in this week, this is what we're going to do. This is what you're going to get. This is kind of like the end result that you'll see in a week from now. And then you check in, you explain the next step, then the next step, until it's ready to go.
You
So you
put
need
that
you need to
solid
be able to
ground under
bring
them.
exactly. It's the same challenge. If you recall, like I don't know, like whatever, 8, 9, 10 years ago, when the world moved from like being very waterfally in nature in terms of like
Yeah,
product releases to like a more
and
agile mindset.
Agile got really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Exactly, it's exactly the
Yeah,
same problem. So you need to break
yeah.
it down. You need to kind of like show them the roadmap. How is it going to happen? How is it going to work? How are you going to get that end result, and break it down into these small iterations to build that confidence and build that trust.
That's brilliant. You're very, very tuned in to not just clients, but people. That's human nature. Sometimes we're so afraid of good things. It feels like jumping off a cliff. And it's like you have to say, but it's good. But yeah, giving them, the stepping stones and the guardrails and the hand holding along the way makes it, a little less intimidating. So
Absolutely.
that's really smart to tune into that. What part of this job, of this venture, drains more energy than people realize?
I mean, it's especially kind of like as a co-founder and someone that kind of like started a company. It's 24/7, 365 days a year. I mean, you're constantly, it's constantly on your mind, even if you're not actively, I don't know, coding or talking to customers or kind of like working on it. You're constantly thinking about it. It's constantly there. It's very challenging. It's very draining in terms of like your mental state and kind of like stuff like that. And it's very easy to get bogged down by the details. I mean,
Yeah.
we talked earlier about like the micro and the macro, and it's so important to be able to kind of like to step away a little bit and kind of like look at things in a
Hmm.
bigger picture and make that official. I mean, put time on your calendar where you kind of like revisit, whether yourself or with your co-founders or with like the whole team, revisit the why, kind of like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Why are we seeing kind of like success, or why are we seeing failure, and kind of like be able to kind of to look at that at a bigger picture, because it's very, very easy to get bogged down by like the day to day, and the day to day is difficult. I mean, you're built you're pushing this boulder like
Yeah.
up a hill, and
Yeah.
it's hard to step away from that and kind of like realize that the view at the top is like very nice. Sometimes you need to
Yeah.
kind of like remind yourself.
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. What do you find yourself? What do you catch yourself still like over engineering?
Personally, myself, I mean, from an engineering standpoint, I typically kind of like over engineer anything that has to do with basics, anything that has to do with infrastructure, anything that has to do with, okay, this is how our code works, or this is kind of like our infrastructure works, and this is how our redundancy works and our backup works, and kind of like how quickly can we deploy things and stuff like that. I tend to personally over engineer that because I think that in general, if you have your fundamentals down well,
Yeah.
then anything on top of that can move quickly. You can iterate quickly, you can change. Changing fundamentals is hard. And that's
Yeah.
true for engineering, kind of like an infrastructure. That's also true for your sales pipeline. That's also true for your product
Operations, everything.
infrastructure,
Yeah.
everything. So you need
Everything.
to spend time on making sure that the pipeline works and kind of like the infrastructure works. Anything on top of that you can change, you can kind of like you can iterate on stuff like that, but it's not as hard as changing
The
changing the product.
foundation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. You have identified some really key forecasting signals. And one of those is when your customer actually repeats your value prop back to you. And you say, "Oh, that's the medicine and not vitamins, working now." And then of course when they start advocating for Benji to their own network and everything. Operationally, how do you capture those human signals, those qualitative signals, and then translate them into like a reliable metric or something useful in your CRM that gives everybody a rhythm to latch onto?
Yeah, those are two. So those 2 points are so important. I mean, once you get to a point where your customer, your potential customer, kind of like repeats back, kind of like why they want to work with you, and repeats it back to you in a way that's sometimes better than the way that I can explain our product. That's kind of like a point where you're like, okay, I'm talking to the right person because they're dealing
Yeah.
with the problem that I'm solving on a daily basis, and they probably just came out of a meeting where they were kind of like looking at their KPI and they realized that it's taking them so long to kind of like to build these partnerships. And that you're solving like a problem that's on a critical path, that's like medicine. And
Hmm.
that's like a key metric for us. And we kind of like it boils down to time at the end of the day, because the quicker you
Yeah.
get to like a stakeholder that understands what you're doing, the quicker you'll get to a point where you're in contracting or kind of like legal team gets involved. And that's something that we track. We track kind of like, time, essentially time to close. How long does it take us kind of like from the moment that we found the right stakeholder to the point that, that customer was signed. And it's a key metric for us. And we also track network effect. Network effect is something
Hmm.
that's very, very important. I mean, when you have a customer that introduces you to one of their customers, And that customer then again understands what we're solving and kind of like realizes how important it is and introduces us to their customers, you know that you kind of
You're
you're
doing something
proposing
right.
something very valuable.
Yeah.
And we track that. We track kind of like this graph of how do we get introduced to this customer, who introduces to this customer, how do we build this kind of like this map of kind of like network effects.
Okay.
And that's something that it's a great indicator of that you're solving an important problem.
Yeah, that's interesting. You have clearly mastered turning this weird chaos of super sharp, fast-paced entity moving kind of alongside, around, and inside of these slow-moving beasts. That's just such a strange contrast to work in. And you're doing really good things with it. So when you look at your future self 1 year from now, what is one thing of this whole operational, construct that you would really want to stop thinking about?
And we're still, I mean, we're obviously still learning. Kind of like we try to get better, kind of like every day, every week, every month, kind of like with bigger and bigger things. I think the one thing that we still find challenging is kind of like we talked about this earlier around like identifying that one person who's like the decision maker.
Yeah.
It's still a process that that we're getting much better on, kind of like using kind of like all the tools that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's still a challenge. I mean, I think it's always going to be a challenge because there's a lot of teams that kind of like that deal with what we're doing, which is actually a good sign because we're solving a problem with
Yeah.
a large surface area. But that's also a challenge because you want to talk with the people where that have like the most difficulty with what we're trying to solve, get a foot in the door there, and then expand within the company and kind of like have this land and expand strategy. And
Hmm.
that can be challenging and kind of like getting better and better at that. I think that that's kind of like what really cracks this business and kind of like what will
Yeah.
really be kind of like the point where our growth will be exponential and our growth will be kind of like not dependent on the amount of hours that we can put into business. At
Yes.
the end of
Yes.
the day, you want to remove that dependency of people and deals, right? You want to kind of
Yeah.
like have deals move quicker than the pace that your people move or the pace that we can hire, or the pace of kind of like our sales.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you can hop on a bike and just ride it without thinking about how to balance and not fall. Yeah. That would be such a relief. I know you'll get there. You're obviously doing so many of the right things and you're so tuned in and you're taking your learnings and, acting on them every day. So I'm inspired by that. Where we're going to wrap up now. I just want to give you a chance to talk about where our listeners can find Benji and where they can find you. If there's are you going to do any events coming up in the new year or where are you going to be?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go ahead and kind of like go to our website. It's withbenji.com. We kind of like, we put all of our partners there, all of our partnerships there, and you can subscribe to our newsletter there as well and kind of get a lot of information about what we do. We put up a lot of content on our LinkedIn's and kind of like we have like updates that we send along and newsletter that we send along. People can subscribe to our site. And yeah, we're looking forward for more and more people to hear about what we're doing and to get in front of as many people as we can.
Awesome. Well, we hope to help you do that. So
Thank
thank you
you.
very much for your time today and we will be signing off.